As of January this year, 82% of practicing physicians are employed by hospitals or corporate entities, with only about 18% being employed in private practice. This is according to Avalare and the Physician Advocacy Institute. And as a former physician recruiter with over a decade of experience placing physicians, advanced practitioners, clinical executives, and academics in interim locum tenens, as well as permanent retained search roles for hospitals, private practices, multi-specialty groups, and other settings, I can confirm that this is true. In fact, the former president of the company I used to work for, Merritt Hawkins, which is now AMN Permanent Solutions, about 20 years ago gave a talk before the Subcommittee on Healthcare Reform for Congress on the decline of the private practice physician model. So if you're coming out of residency right now, hospital employment isn't so much one of many options, it's more the default option, and it's where most people inevitably end up going. And for many people, that's great. That's not necessarily a bad thing. What I want to do today is talk about hospital employment, the good, the bad, the pros, the cons, the ugly, the wonderful. And the reality is that there's a lot of benefits to it, but there's a trade-off as well. And we'll explore that here a little bit, but you trade autonomy and independence for the infrastructure being someone else's problem so you can just practice medicine. Some that's great, for others not so much. So let's look at what is genuinely good for hospital employment. One, the compensation floor is very real. It's real and it's protected. You walk into a guaranteed set salary, or in some cases a draw, but you walk into a guarantee that's protected for at least 1 to 2 years. And it doesn't matter what good or bad comes with it. You've got that promise. You've got that guarantee. There's zero capital risk. You are not signing a lease. You're not securing a line of credit. You're not hiring an IT team. You're not hiring any staff at all. You're not worrying about any overhead. In hospital employment, unlike private practice, every dollar of overhead is someone else's responsibility. 3, you're insulated from collections. This is often very overrated. There's a lot of dislike with how RVUs work, and that's completely fine and understandable. I get it. I've certainly dealt with that in many ways myself. CMS will set the Medicare standards. I believe it's $33.40, I think, for a qualified participant in value-based care at RVU value. And that's the low standard rate. That's the federal standard rate. Private pay will pay higher, and then state Medicaid will pay usually less. But when you're in a hospital, it doesn't matter what insurance someone has, what kind of money is coming in. It doesn't matter if you're in the ED taking unassigned call for someone that comes in and is getting taken care of. If you're a laborist or something and someone's delivering a baby, but they have no insurance and there's no compensation coming in, or there's any kind of fallout with a payer, you're completely insulated from all of that. You get paid for the work that you do, and the hospital will eat that cost, whether it's a loss or a gain. So there's that guaranteed set zero risk. And the 4 is benefits and malpractice. These tend to be something that a lot of private practices just can't compete with. Some can. As a physician recruiter, I would always try to make as competitive as possible any private practice I would work with, but often the common thing was we just can't compete with the hospitals. A lot of times, the private practice roles were for those that were seeking more of the autonomous position. And look, truth, I'm just going to step outside of, try to be as objective as possible here. I just want to give the information, and then you make your decisions. I would generally say if you're coming out of residency right now, hospital employment is probably a better option. There's a lot that comes with running a business that you were just not taught in medical school. Don't deal with, and you're thrust in something, and you're spending a significant amount of your time doing non-medical, non-clinical things. It's probably better for most, not everyone. Like, make your own decision. I'm just trying to give the best advice here as I possibly can from my years of experience. Work in the hospitals. If you want to stay there, that's fine. We certainly need it. Hospitals are struggling. Private practices are struggling. We have a severe shortage of physicians across the board. But if you have that autonomous, independent streak and you want to make those own decisions, I'm going to do a talk here after this one on the pros and cons of private practice, where we're kind of go over some of this a little bit more and get a little bit deeper into it from that side. That's generally something you want to work your way into. Running a business and a practice is a lot different than just being a clinician. Now, we need both. I'm an advocate of private practice. I worked for a very large ACO before I started doing this. I had a health injury, severe spinal stenosis, took me out of work, haven't been able to work, and I just deal with managing that. And it's one of the reasons why I do this channel. I'd certainly appreciate it if you would support me. If this is at all helpful, please subscribe. Follow along, share, like, comment. All those are wonderful things that the algorithm likes, because I really enjoyed doing this, and I enjoy helping people, and I hope to be able to keep doing that. So benefits and malpractice, as I was saying, it is very hard for a private practice to compete with this. And there's two different types of malpractice insurance. I've talked about this before, but this is really important to get. You have occurrence-based and you have claims-made. Occurrence-based is the larger policy. It's much more expensive. Most private practices can't afford it. A lot of hospitals can, but you do not know. Do not assume that you get it if you work for a hospital. You have to ask. Occurrence covers anything that occurred during the life of the policy, even if a claim is made 20 years later. Claims made only covers claims made during the life of that policy. Anything after, you're not covered by that policy. There's something called tail insurance. Tail insurance is a kind of middle ground where you can have a claims policy. You can buy tail coverage to follow when the claims policy ends. So if someone does make a claim within a certain period of time, tail can vary in its length, but you want to find out who pays for that tail if it's a claims made policy. And tail commonly runs anywhere from 1.5 to 3 times the cost of your final annual premium, which in this case, the hospital would be paying, but you want to make sure you know what that is. Again, don't assume that you're covered. And then 5 is the referral pipeline. You're a primary care doctor, you have a pipeline of specialists to refer out to. If you are a specialist, you have a pipeline of primary care doctors who will refer to you. And this is just built in. You don't have to do the kind of chasing down on the private practice side. Now, next, let's talk about the Stark ceiling. Stark law is very important. A hospital cannot legally pay you for the money you generate for them. That's not a negotiation tactic. It's something you just need to understand as how things are. This is just the way of it. It's not them being cheap. This is federal law. The anti-kickback statute and Stark law prevent certain things that you will not find yourself dealing with in private practice. Compensation under these laws between a hospital and physician must be set at what's known as fair market value. It must be set in advance. It cannot vary with the value or volume of your referrals. It's got to be set at fair market value. So if you order an MRI, the hospital bills the technical component, the hospital keeps the ancillaries. You do not. Private practice, that's not necessarily true. If you own the MRI, you can bill off the ancillaries. That's why it's important to understand the modern survey value, the MGMA, the AMGA, Sullivan-Cotter. These are ranges, and this is where it's important. You work off of percentiles. So you can't negotiate a specific set ceiling, but fair market value is itself a bit flexible. You need to know the ranges that you can negotiate within. They're not universally all the same. So stop negotiating against the ceiling, negotiate within it. Negotiate within the framework and the parameters of percentages because you can get that. Familiarize yourself with what the 50th percentile is, the 75th percentile, the 90th percentile. These are the amounts that you can work within. If you're seeing patients at a 50th percentile, don't expect to be paid at the 90th percentile. But if you're seeing patients at the expectation of the 90th percentile and you're being paid at the 55th percentile, 75th percentile, you actually have a cause to negotiate and say, hey, I need to be at a different level than what I'm at. You want to know which survey. They vary. Look at all of them. You want to know which region. You want to know which year. Surveys vary by year. Next, you need to know what happens afterwards. You have the treadmill and the silent rebase. What happens after your contract period ends? You have that guarantee for a few years, but then you go into a production model and you want to understand what that looks like. You want to understand not only what are the expectations, but what are other doctors making? Your RVU rate, the conversion rate. You want to know the threshold. Now understand RVUs have 3 components. You have your work RVU, your practice expense, and your malpractice. And these are all billed for. You are paid off the work RVU. Loosely off the top of my head, I think WRVUs are about 50%. Malpractice, I think, is 4 or 5%. Practice expense is the rest. So you get a slice of the pie. But that's what you work with. So usually when I say RVUs, what I mean are work RVUs, because that's what the physician gets paid off in the setting. And that's what's really relevant to you. You want to know what those thresholds are, what those amounts are. Things you got to understand is, one, you don't control the inputs. So when you move off of your contracted period and your pay, you don't necessarily control the patient volume that you have coming in. So you want to know what those expectations are. Clinic template, referral patterns, panel assignment, which satellite office and location they send you to. Who's working with you? Do you have any support from MAs or CNAs or advanced practitioners? You want to ask, what are the actual WRVUs that are made in this department? Not what the expectation. You want to know the threshold. Threshold is you are expected to make this much before you can start being paid off of these. And that's what their overhead, they take the overhead from that. Threshold is a certain amount. You want to find out what that is. But you also want to know who's making that. Who in here has been making that? Are they making it? Are they falling short? Are they earning over their amount? And then two, you want to know who gets credit for what. If you're a physician, you want to know if you're doing a shared or split visit with an advanced practitioner, how does that work? If you're an advanced practitioner, you're going to want to know the exact same thing. And then additionally, you want to know what happens with the non-clinical work that generates no WRVUs. Dealing with your massive inbox, prior authorizations, committees, dealing with your documentation. None of this stuff produces any compensation, but it is a massive amount of your work. There's a massive time commitment, and you got to do this right or you could be in a lot of trouble. So what about that? Make sure you have an understanding of how that's covered so you're not spending all of your evenings trying to catch up, which unfortunately can happen sometimes, and not getting paid for it. 3, the threshold, the rate, and the draw. You want to know, again, what that threshold is. You want to know what the conversion rate is. Conversion rate is set by CMS at the Medicare level. The hospitals will pay you above that. So loosely off the top of my head, I think for 2026, it's $33.40 per RVU. But generally, you're going to be making quite a bit above that. Hospitals are going to compensate you for that because there's a high degree of private pay, which pays much higher than that. It depends on the specialty, depends on the region. Understand too, you can't change the value of an RVU. So a clinic visit might be worth whatever RVUs. A surgery is going to be worth a lot more RVUs. You can't change what amount of RVUs is due for what, but you can negotiate, again, within the range of what you're getting paid for those RVUs, at least in most cases. There are some hospitals and systems that have standard across the board. This is just what they pay. You're not necessarily going to be able to push back on some of those. Look, here's the thing. Always ask. Always negotiate. The worst thing to do is say, hey, we pay all of our primary care doctors. We pay all of our radiologists. We pay all of our interventional cardiologists at this rate. There's no negotiating room at the value of what we pay for the RVU just because it's going to be too much trouble with all of the other doctors we have and staff. That's going to happen sometimes. Nothing wrong with asking. Always push and ask for what you need. You can do it without being rude. You can do it very polite, but you should definitely do it. And then your answer will tell you whether or not this is something that you can take. Additionally, the draw I'd mentioned. You don't see draws as much these days. You still do, especially more in a lot of the more rural places. Draw is when you are given money in advance. Unlike a salary is you are paid. You show up, you're paid. A draw is you are given this amount, but it's a forgivable loan of sorts, similar to a sign-on bonus or loan forgiveness. And what you want to know is, are there any clawbacks? If for some reason you are not allowed, when you move into your production model, if you're not allowed to, whether your fault or you're just unable to see the patient volume, are they going to take money back? Are you going to actually lose any money in your draw? And additionally, remember, CMS reevaluates RVUs yearly. You want to find out when you are paid on the set RVUs, what year that's for, and does it change? Does it change at their discretion? In the 2026 physician fee schedule, there was about a 2.5% reduction in payment on RVUs for diagnostic procedures. Would that affect you? Would that change your threshold? You want to make sure that you have this stuff hammered out in the contract. In 2021, if I recall correctly, office visits jumped quite a bit. So in a situation like that, you want to find out if that's the case, are you getting paid more or is the employer going to raise the threshold so that you're still getting paid the same? And next, we will quickly want to talk about the 4 clauses. I'm going to do a little bit more work on contracts in the future, but understand I only speak from experience. This is for knowledge, educational, entertainment purposes only. I am not a contract attorney. Speak with a contract attorney. It is very important that you do so. I'm just going to go over things that I know, that I've seen, and that I'm familiar with from my years as a recruiter to hopefully give you a better understanding. But this is something that you really want to pursue on your own with a licensed legal representative. First is termination with or without cause, specifically without cause. With cause can be pretty self-explanatory, but usually the way it works is either you or the employer can let you go without cause. Just bye, we're done, thanks, have a good life. And usually there's anywhere from a 90, sometimes 180. If you're in academics, it can be a little bit higher, but generally you're going to have about a 90-day, you have to stay, or they have to keep you for another 90 days when they let you go. What happens with trailing AR that you earn during that 90 days? How does the payment work out? Are there any changes in payment if you are let go and you have to work out the last 90 days of your contract? Generally, that's more of a private practice conversation. And the next is the restrictive covenant. There was a big move a while back to ban restrictive covenants at the national level. Don't be deceived. Unfortunately, that movement has died. It's done. They've withdrawn and it's a state level thing now. Now, the good thing is, given the severity of the physician shortage, a lot of states are pushing protective clauses that allow physicians to not be constrained by non-competes. Look at what the state law is with where you're at, and more are starting to follow suit, because a physician who comes in to see patients and there's a restrictive covenant has to leave and go somewhere else. Well, sure, that might protect the employer, but ultimately those patients in the community suffer. So there is a lot more protection now for physicians than there was. You also want to know what the restrictive covenants, because you're not always going to get out of it. Let's just be honest. You want to know what it applies to. If you're working for a hospital that has you at one location, is the restrictive covenant 2 years, 20 miles from that office, or from every single satellite office and location that they have, so there's no competition? That happens. That's very extreme. I would always try to argue against this when I was placing candidates. Look, you've got 30 locations throughout Atlanta and they're only working at one. Keep the non-compete to that one so they don't have to move their entire family probably out of the state, or at least out of the area, because they wouldn't be able to practice anywhere with all those locations. Make sure you understand what those restrictions are. A lot of times they're going to try to lock you out from all locations, because the goal is they don't want you competing with them at all. Not just that location or that patient base, but at all. Push back on that. That's very strict. And then clawbacks as well. We talked about this with draws. But remember, loan forgiveness and sign-on bonuses are also forgivable loans. They're money given up front, and remember too, it's taxable. But clawbacks are also based on the amount that you receive. So if you're given a $10,000 sign-on bonus, but after taxes, you take home $7,000 and you leave before the contracted period, you're paid, you're expected on that whole $10,000, whatever it is. Sometimes it'll be a full clawback. That's very strict. I would always argue against that. In fact, I wrote a paper on prorating clawbacks to, if they work 2 or 3 out of a 4 or 5 year whatever it is, if whatever percentage they work 33%, then they've earned that 33%. Just take back the 66. That's more and more common now. It's fair. You sign a contract, you get this money, it's for this amount of time. Sometimes things happen, family emergencies, you have to move on, and you don't also want to be stuck with the entirety of a bill against something that you couldn't control. And remember too, even forgiveness is taxable, and it's usually taxed on the year it's forgiven. So whatever that tax bracket is. And then you want to look also what isn't in the contract. Things like location, schedule, clinic hours, productivity targets, quality metrics, or even the compensation plan itself. Generally, the way that it works is you get a contract and it's a boilerplate. There'll be some negotiation room. But then there'll be things known as exhibits or addendums that are added on later. You want to be very careful with this language, because if the contract you sign and agree to legally only has some vague reference to see exhibit A, see addendum, whatever it is, and you haven't agreed to that, they can change that at their own discretion. You haven't signed on for that addendum unless that's part of the contract. I would always get both sides to sign the entirety. If we sign a contract, that's great. We'll sign this contract, but it's contingent upon agreement to the terms we set in the exhibit. So if we sign a contract, that exhibit needs to come right along with it and say, here's the amount you're going to get paid. Here's the hours you're going to get paid. Here's your call schedule. Here's your expectations. You don't want that to change when you sign a contract or not legally bound to something that an employer can completely change on you. Generally, when you think of hospital employment, you think of security. Yes, this is true, but also remember, hospital executive leadership rotates a lot. And with it, oftentimes can go the promises and commitments that were made. Do not take someone's word for something. That CMO, that CEO, that COO, they might not be there in 3 to 5 years. In fact, the probability is on the side that they won't. There's a consistent rotation at the C-suite level for hospitals. That's how it works. Contracts will change. Are you protected? Does the contract change when the executive team leaves and a new team comes in? You want to get it in writing. Sign what's in writing. Don't take handshakes or promises or anything like that. And also understand, finally, renewal contracts, the reality is they're never as good as the first one. In fact, if you look at a lot of the compensation data out there, like MGMA, AMGA, Sullivan Cotter, in fact, all of these reports will take amounts from in-practice physicians for what they're making. But the company I used to work for, Merritt Hawkins, which is now AMN Permanent Solution, they do a great annual incentive review. I love it. I read this thing every time it comes out. I'm always waiting for the next one. And they have their top 20 specialties that they place, and this is permanent retained. They have academics, and they have hospital, they have private practice. Very large company. They do a lot of great work. And what they do is they they don't show the same amount you're going to see in MGMA or AMG or anything else. The difference on those numbers of those 20 specialties that they put in there that's the placement amount. That's what someone signed for. I used to have to enter data into Salesforce of placements that I made, and that data would be reflected in the report. That's why sometimes you'll see the numbers at the AMN, the Permanent Annual Incentive Review, is going to be higher because that's the recruitment numbers. That's what it takes to get someone in place. When you look at the other surveys, these are the amounts people who are in place and practicing are making. You're not going to be saying renewal contracts are just generally not as good. They have to be more competitive given the shortage to try to bring you in. But the reality is they're going to generally balance out. So don't just get excited about that, whatever it is. It can be anywhere from 1 year to 5 years. So if you're getting a lot of loan forgiveness, you're probably looking at a 5-year contract, which isn't necessarily bad. But generally, you're going to see around 2 to 3 year contracts. It's usually how it goes. What happens after that? You want to have an idea of what you're getting into. They're not always going to be able to say, and this is just kind of, unfortunately, part of how it works, is they can't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be making something when the contract period you sign ends. But you want to ask. You want to get an idea. You want to ask about how are doctors who are practicing there 5-10 years, who are off their contracts, what are they making? How are they doing? Some of the information they can't share. But again, there's nothing wrong with asking. You want to get an idea of what happens, but you do want to understand renewal contracts. Unless you're extremely competitive, they really need you. Maybe you've got a competing offer as your contract ends. Some other recruiter, me in the past, trying to call you and say, hey, come take my job. It's much better. You want to make sure that you understand to the best of your ability, as best you can, what potential is out there, but do go in there understanding that it's just kind of how it works. So ultimately understand hospital employment is a very safe choice. And for many people, it is a great choice and it is the best choice. Not necessarily for everyone. For the very independent minded, I like to run everything. I want to be the one who's in charge of the medical supplies I use, the staff I have, the hours I keep. I want to handle the billing. I want the ancillary revenue. I don't want to deal with Stark laws and anti-kickback laws that keep me at certain percentile ranges, particularly if you're surgical specialty, you might get capped. I've placed oral maxillofacial surgeons that were making 1.5 million in private practice and are capped at under $1 million because of Stark law, but they're burnt out or running their practice. And it's like, you're going to take a financial loss, but you're not going to deal with the overhead anymore. Just going to see patients. And oral maxillofacial surgeons, they have to wine and dine the dentists because you can't walk into an OMS office and get a visit. You're referred exclusively by dentists. So there's a lot that goes on in private practice. The pay and the headache balance out like most things in life. So if you're looking more for the safe, secure, generally speaking, physician hospital employment is a great, wonderful opportunity for you. But stay tuned. I'll talk next about private practice and some other options here in the future. But again, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Please subscribe, share these videos, and I will see you in the next one.